the best coaches in the game. We really ain't playing. We regroup up in the Slack chat where the coaches debrief. We be piecing these puzzles, occupy the chunk of the pie. Ain't no lie when we hit the block, helmets casket is top. You be seeing helmet after helmet, helmet after helmet. First place, second place, fifth place, eighth place, 12th place, 15, 16, 20. So many helmets, you got blurred vision, we got too many. Tick your tech. Oh man, shit. They got us fucked up. Army, regroup. We pledge always to have that edge. We don't fire warning shots. Competition just dropped. We locked and loaded before lock. Whatever the time, yeah. Do you even correlate?
Being the best requires a willingness to outwork your competition. There's always someone smarter, faster, sharper, more naturally gifted to come around.
Welcome back to DFS Army. It is FantasyFling for another look at MME. Strategy and Milly Maker review. Taking a look back at week 6. So let's do it. All right, so I wrote this up at dfsarmy.com as I do each and every week. Give me a follow on Twitter at FantasyFling as I tweet this out as soon as I write it up. But we look back. Obviously, we do several things with the Milly Maker. Burns does the Shark Chronicles, looking back at Milly Maker data from 2016. And based on that, he recommends several of his plays. And then one thing I do each and every week is I'm going to do the write-up, a weekly write-up. So, we're kind of seeing where the trends are in that season, in that week, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, what's going on. And then obviously we look at some MME strategy. So with this write-up, what some of the things that we're looking at is trends, what things are doing now, where they were last year and the year before. And that said, week 6 was much like in 2021. And the reason for that is in 2021, we would have a lot of great game environments, right? Your top 5 projected games that people will be looking to target. And oftentimes they would fail as far as, game stacking options from those games. So you might have like 1 or 2 pieces that would actually end up being in the nuts. But if you were looking to heavy stack that game, the scoring just wasn't there on both sides for it to be a game that goes nuclear. So that's kind of what we had last week, which you'll see in this winning Milly Maker build. Even though Allen Diggs and Juju smashed from that top game that we thought, maybe could be a repeat of what we saw in the playoffs last year between Buffalo and Kansas City. Really, you had several lineups in the top 100 that had some pieces of those players, but the lineup that won the Milly Maker, it was not a heavy stack. Really, it was just one player from that game. So you'll see at the top here, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. That was actually the stack brought back with Kamara. And you also had Dion Jackson, who was a pretty good value play with Hines and Jonathan Taylor out. And then Juju being the one piece from that game, the Buffalo and Kansas City game that ended up in the winning Milly Maker lineup. It was pretty crazy. You had just one small stack and several one-offs, lots of one-offs, good matchups, optimal plays. So Jalen Waddle with 20 points, Brandon Ayuk with 28 points, Robert Tonyan with 19 points, and then the Cardinals D with 14 points. So from a stacking look at this game, we had Joe Burrow, 35.5, Jamar Chase, 35.5 almost, and then Alvin Kamara was the bring back at 18 points. So the 3-player average was 29 points. And from a stacking perspective, one thing we need to look at, I've been looking at this a lot this week and tweeted out some things about it, is when scoring is down, which it is because this is the lowest scoring start. I've seen several stats, but really since 2017, and I was able to do a little bit of digging on Pro Football Reference and see that the team average of 21.7 points is the lowest we've seen since 2017. It's pretty obvious, right? If games are hitting the under and teams are scoring low just across the league, you're really just going to want to take pieces from every game, and you're not looking to heavy stack because it's just more times than not, it's going to fail unless that one lineup that really hits, which we'll get into in the MME strategy. But we've seen 4 out of 6 weeks where the primary stack really only had a quarterback plus one pass catcher. This was the one time where we did see a quarterback plus a pass catcher and a bring back. That said, the bring back in this situation, even though it made its way into the winning lineup, it wasn't necessary, as there were other options that were cheaper than Kamara that actually outproduced him, as we'll get into when we look at ownership real quick here. So, for example, Ramondre Stevenson was only 6,000, and he actually scored 6.4 more points than Kamara. So, he was quite a bit more owned, obviously. And for correlation purposes, you could see why Kamara was used. But, Ramondre Stevenson would have been the better optimal play. And, this lineup would have scored more. So this lineup was really low owned. We're at like 98% on the season. This lineup was crazy low owned, 54%. And really, the main stack, you kind of see why, because Joe Burrow, even though a lot of people were on Chase, myself included, I had like 44% exposure to him in tournaments, did well, ended up being a profitable day for me. It would have been so much better to stack him with Joe Burrow. And most of the field didn't. He was only 4% owned. Alvin Kamara, he was a play off of a lot of the chalky backs like Ramondre Stevenson and Eno Benjamin and Kenneth Walker. He was only 12% owned. And the same with Dion Jackson, 8% owned. And he looked really good. This was a sharp play because we saw Dion Jackson, between him and Phillip Lindsay in that Broncos game with both Hines and Taylor out. Dion Jackson looked like the best back. So obviously, the winner, the Milly Maker, had him as well. So it was really good play. And then Juju, this is kind of one of those things where like flip a coin, right? MBS was a lot of people, just based on target share and everything, MBS was probably the better play. And he actually had a touchdown called back. And then it got called back. And then Juju ended up getting the end zone and smashed. And he's under 5% owned. So this is the type of leverage play you want when you have chalky pieces in a game like Diggs and Allen and Kelsey. So Juju, less than 5%. Jalen Waddle, Skylar Thompson was in the game. He ended up getting hurt. Teddy came in. Didn't really matter, right? Jalen Waddle was probably going to have a great game regardless. He was 3% owned. And then Brandon Ayuk, negative game script. 49ers, they were behind the whole game, so they just started throwing Ayuk, and he was amazing. They definitely need to get him the ball more. And then Robert Tonyan, 2% owned, kind of the same thing with the Packers. They were actually trailing the whole game to the Jets at Lambeau. Pretty crazy. But yeah, Tonyan looked good, and he got a lot of targets and a great leverage play. And then Jamar Chase is pretty crazy on a slate where there was quite a few chalky wide receivers at 14%. Is pretty low owned, all things considered, for Jamar Chase. And really, I had him as one of my plays of the week. And early in the week, he was like 5% on, but everyone was talking about him being a great play. And you see ownership ends up rising. Cardinals D, less than 1% on. This is exactly why you embrace variance. Has scored, like 14 points. And less than 1% ownership. So that is obviously how you're going to embrace variance and hope to be on the positive side of it, as that is what we see win with defenses. So this lineup, even though it was crazy low owned, could have afforded to eat a little more chalk like a Ramondre Stevenson, and actually would have been a better overall. But when someone wins the Milly Maker, you're obviously not going to criticize them. Every once in a while, you will see a really low owned super contrarian lineup win the Milly Maker, like with this lineup. Now, as far as leverage plays, we mentioned it. Dion Jackson, Joe Burrow, Juju, and Ayuk. Ayuk, 11 targets, 83 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Just great leverage play. I do think Burrow was the top leverage play on the slate because he actually outscored Josh Allen. He was extremely cheap, as we'll get into in the player pricing, and he was less than 5% owned. So it's one of those things when you look back at your process, and this is a mistake I made. It's like, if you're going to be heavy on a Jamar Chase, why aren't you just playing some Joe Burrow stacks? Even if you don't have a ton of exposure to Joe Burrow stacks, as we see when we get into the MME strategy, just even having like 5% exposure, 10% max. You could see how it certainly paid off for some of the top pros we're about to get into. Now, from a player pricing standpoint, so this is something that we want to look at because we're looking for specific trends, things that to avoid. So, for example, if you're continuing to jam in every week running backs and wide receivers in the 8 to 9K range, and then you look at past slates and you see that really, even on a slate like this where there was extreme running back and wide receiver value, or really running back value, and you're not seeing like 8 to 9K players in the winning lineup, it kind of just goes to show that you probably don't want to have lineup construction for the Milly Maker with a lot of max price players. So Joe Burrow, this was a pay down from the Josh Allen. A lot of people had Josh Allen. He smashed. If you had Josh Allen, he did win a lot of tournaments. He was in the top 100 of the Milly Maker. He was great. But Joe Burrow was the top leverage play, and he was only 6,700. So 5.2x the salary, which was definitely way better than Josh Allen because I believe he's like 8,200, 83, whatever it was. And then Kamara. So by paying down a little bit for a Robert Tonyan at 3,600 and a Brandon Ayuk at 5,400 and Dion Jackson and Juju at 5,200, you could afford almost paying 7,000 for Kamara. And he obviously wasn't the best play. This was actually the lowest play in the lineup from a fantasy points per dollar perspective. But yeah, Dion Jackson, 5X, Juju, almost 5X, Jalen Waddle, 3X, Ayuk, smash, 5X, and Tonyan, 5X as well. And then Jamar Chase, this was the one pay-up option at wide receiver that was pretty close to that 8K range, but we still have not seen a player in a running back or wide receiver position above 8K. Now, one thing in this lineup that is kind of shocking, in all 2021 and 22, until this week, until week 6, we had not seen a lineup that was under 6X with there would be at least one player that was over 6X. When the scoring is lower, like it was this week, 224 points, that's obviously more likely to happen. But even that said, with 2021, with scoring being an average of 233 points, which is way less than it was in 2020, we still had at least one 6X player. This obviously didn't happen, but one thing that was still very efficient that you see about this lineup is 1, 2, 3, 4 players above 5X. So that's pretty rare that you will see that. And then last, from a ceiling perspective, after 6 weeks, the average score in the Milly Maker, it's declining. So after the hot start that we had, several weeks of over 250 points, we had 251 and 284 to start the season. And then we had a down week, and then it was right back to 252. We've also had weeks of 210. As I mentioned, that was week 3, 244, and now 224. It's bringing the average below 250 to a seasonal average of 244. So with scoring down with the lowest it's been since 2017, we will probably have, if that continues, we will have that average closer to the 233 that we saw in 2021. And one thing to keep in mind in 2021, we did not see big game stacks. What we saw was a lot of stacks with little pieces. So you'd get, a small game stack for maybe 2 to 3 games. So, or you would just have like a team stack where a team just kind of romps. They score 38 points. The other team scores 3 points. So, you'll have like a Josh Allen, a Stephon Diggs, and Isaiah McKenzie in that game, but you really won't have a bring back. So not forcing bringbacks and, focusing on smaller stacks is something that we'll keep in mind. If scoring continues to be low, something we'll keep in mind as we're looking to build our rosters. So that said, let's get right into the MME strategy of some top DFS pros. Okay. I don't know what happened here. It's always an issue with this. Okay. So just want to make sure we're still recording. since it's open in another screen. All right, we're good. So Utica, this is one of the guys who is listed as a top DFS pro, and most weeks I haven't covered his MME strategy because he's normally not winning. But that said, this week he had a positive ROI in the Milly Maker 9,300, and you'll see why, because his top lineup, and this is kind of what we talk about, is the MME guys. They will go kind of heavy on one game, or they may play more super contrarian, and they have a lot of losing weeks, but it's that one lineup that hits that can make the whole week. And in this case, it made his week. Obviously, had he done a little better, it would have made his whole season to win the Milly Maker. But he still finished 11th. He won $10,000, and he scored 205 points. So despite not having a ton of exposure to Joe Burrow, I believe he only had, we'll get into exposures, he only had like 5% exposure to Joe Burrow and 18% exposure to Jamar Chase, which is a pretty good amount. He had that one lineup that really hit. And one thing to keep in mind here is it is okay to eat running back chalk. So a lot of times people, they look at things in black and white, right? They're like, well, the easiest way to leverage the field is to avoid the running back chalk and to play contrarian and play some of these other running backs that nobody's on. And, and hopefully those running backs, the chalk running backs, fail and you'll have a great day. And while there's some truth in that, you will see by studying past lineups that a lot of the MME pros, a lot of the top DFS pros, they are willing to eat that running back chalk, because when you have a player who's very underpriced relative to their value, if that player has a good day, you basically have no chance of winning. You have no chance of winning a big GPP if that player has a great day relative to their value. So let's say Eno Benjamin, he didn't have the best day, but if Eno Benjamin at 4,600 or whatever he was scored, 25, 30 points, and you didn't have him and he's 40% owned, like, good luck, because there are so many other angles they can hit with their lineup to build around Eno Benjamin that, you get a lot of MME pros, they're going to figure it out. So kind of right here, you see Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. That was a stack. That was a contrarian stack, really less than 20% between these two, which when you look at Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs being way higher priced, and having the day that they had, a good day, but when you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, way lower price, you're just not going to win out, in a field of 200 plus thousand entries. And then Ramondre Stevenson, he was the chalk. He was about 40% owned, as well as Kenneth Walker. He was 20%, 21% owned. But they did enough, and this lineup construction around it was really good. So that's all that mattered. And then Traquan Smith. So they basically had a Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Traquan Smith bring back, which really at 3,700, 13 points, he did enough to get there. Irv Smith, and then Stephon Diggs. So this lineup really ate a lot of chalk, had 130% total, but it didn't matter because you have Irv Smith 3.8%, Traquan Smith 3%, and then Joe Burrow 4.5%, and then Seattle D at less than 1%, 17 total points. So really good. Just one lineup to make the day for an MME pro who's putting 150 lineups in the Milly Maker. So, and again, I kind of alluded to it. Ramondre Stevenson, even though the field was on Ramondre 39.5%, he was way over the field at 74%. And this is something you're going to continue to see with a lot of the pros. Chris Godwin, he was in a smash spot and he was chalk, but it didn't matter. Ate that chalk. Some of the same thing. Now, Utica probably would have had a bad day had that one lineup not hit, because Godwin didn't get there. Neither did Brady. Was heavy on him. I know this because I was heavy on those stacks. It was a smash spot, but they just didn't get there. So Brady, 28%. Saquon, he had a pretty good day. Could have had a better day if he didn't stop at the goal line right before that touchdown, but 24%. Dalvin Cook, he was a pretty good play as well. And then you could see, obviously, in that Bengals and Saints game, Traquan Smith, a lot of exposure there. Marcus Callaway, 10%. In relative to the field, quite a bit of exposure. And then kind of the same thing. So, again, Brady, Lamar Jackson, they didn't get there. So, this would probably been a bad day for Utica, but that one lineup is really all it takes. So, you'll see a lot of the top pros. If it was kind of one of those things, the theme of the day is if you did not have Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, you didn't have a lot of exposure to those two, you probably just weren't going to win. So Megan Joy, she is one of the top DFS pros, and she does a lot better in the Milly Maker than most of the other MME players. Again, from an ROI basis, even the Awesomes, the Chipotle Addicts, she is certainly up there with them in ROI. She tends to be a little more profitable, I think. In her down weeks don't really seem to be as bad. So she was, again, we talked about it. Yeah, Eno Benjamin, 4,600. Was all over Eno Benjamin. She did her top lineup. She did have a Allen, Diggs, and Juju stack, and also a Mixon and Juwan Johnson stack, and an Eno and Arizona stack. So two small game stacks, and then a team stack. And this top lineup scored 181 points, was good for about $150. But as far as her exposures, she was heavy on Eno. Justin Jefferson, sharp play. She was heavy on that Vikings game, which a lot of people were. I remember listening to Osmo, and on the contrary, he was pretty heavy on Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson stacks. We see some Tyler Higbee there. Stephon Diggs, she was over the field on Stephon Diggs, who had a good day. Leonard Fournette. So some Tampa Bay, and then Alvin Kamara as well. Which I like Kamara, but I just haven't been playing him a lot after, just kind of seeing what Taysom Hill does to his ceiling. But it's the thought process, I think, here is a lot of people are going to be on the chalk, herself included, the Eno Benjamins and whatnot. This is a way to get a little different by being heavy on an Alvin Kamara and hoping that he breaks a few, and that, Taysom Hill doesn't come in at the goal line and vulture some touchdowns. Adam Thielen. So, yeah, as we saw earlier with the Cousins, Jefferson, she certainly liked that game environment. And then one thing to note, which you'll kind of see here, is if you're going to play a lot of the running backs, right? Like she had 96% exposure to Eno Benjamin. One way to just get different is playing quite a few quarterbacks who are low owned. So she played Marcus Mariota. She played Trevor Lawrence. Marcus Mariota, she had 8% exposure, and, the field's only 0.5%. So if you can play, Rodgers, Mariota, Jimmy G, some of these guys, to kind of change your lineup so that you're getting at least really different in like one spot, and hoping, you get a Jimmy G to Ayuk type of stack that you can play an Eno Benjamin, you could play Ramondre Stevenson, you could play a Kenneth Walker, and you're different in that one spot, and you hope that one spot really goes off. Yeah, and Joe Burrow as well. So obviously that was her strategy, and really it was a strategy of the day for a lot of the top pros. Just getting different at quarterback and wide receiver a little bit, and then just really eating the chalk at running back with all the value. All right, so as we kind of just talked about, with being able to get different in that one game, a lot of the pros seem to be targeting the New Orleans and Cincinnati game as a way to get different off the chalk. And obviously, if you hit the right players in that game, that is really how you win. So Chipotle Addict had a Justin Burrow, Jamar Chase, Hayden. So this is a pretty heavy stack, right? Burrow plus Jamar Chase plus Hayden Hurst plus Alvin Kamara plus Traquan Smith. So the majority of your lineups, unless you're an MME pro and you can afford the bankroll, the majority of your lineups, you're not going to want to stack like this because obviously it's a quick way to go broke. If this game really hits the under, these are just dead lineups like right away. But in this case, and it'd be a great lineup. And this is MME strategy. The DFS pros with big bankroll are willing to embrace because they know that they just need that one lineup to hit that can really, 10x whatever it may be. Try to hit the top 100, the top 10 of the Milly Maker, and hopefully win the whole thing. So, great lineup from the Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase. But I think really what crushed it was just trying to over correlate. So this is kind of a strategy had you just gone with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and maybe an Alvin Kamara bring back like we saw in the winning Milly Maker build. And then you just got different elsewhere. This lineup, would have had a good chance for competing for first. So there was some eating of the chalk here with Ramondre Stevenson and Stephon Diggs, 39%, 25%. But yeah, the Traquan and then the Hayden Hurst is really where it got different, but they just didn't get there, right? Also, Henderson was pretty high on at 17%. And then the Pittsburgh D didn't quite get there. But this was his top lineup for Chipotle Addict. And obviously heavy on Kamara, 60%. Heavy on Higbee. Henderson, 42%. Traquan, 26%. So super heavy in that one game. And then also heavy in the Arizona and Seattle game, which a lot of people were. This was the second highest projected game total on the slate, so not surprising. Benjamin, 64%. Lockett, 46%. Also pretty heavy on Lamar. And, Lamar was in a good spot. He just didn't quite get there. And he was low owned. And this is the chance that you take. You got to play these low owned players. With that kind of upside, that kind of ceiling, when everyone's on, the Josh Allens of the world and whatnot. DK Metcalf, 26%. So pretty high on that game. And then, just trying to get different too with eating a lot of that chalk, as we kind of alluded to with some of the other pros. Marcus Mariota, 10%. He had a pretty good game for sure, given his salary and whatnot. Yeah, Stafford 6%, Burrow 7%. So, getting different and avoiding the shock. All right, the last one we're going to take a look at is Giant Squid. One top 5, top 10 DFS Pro. Overall, pretty much a break-even week with $150, $3,000 in the Milly Maker to really only lose $60 and to take a chance on winning the Milly Maker. Obviously, that is what they will take 9 times out of 10. So, again, going with the theme of being able to eat the running back chalk. Now, Ramondre Stevenson, it's not just that Damian Harris is out. Ramondre Stevenson is just a really good back. And, he already gets a lot of receptions over on DraftKings, and he splits carries with Damian Harris. So with him out, he was just in a great spot, and he played pretty well, but he certainly could have done a lot better based on, what we thought. We'll take the 25 points, but he certainly could have hit over 30. That's the kind of ceiling he has. Now, this was a really good top lineup. And again, we talk about you got 39% on Ramondre Stevenson. Now, this lineup got way different. And what was crazy about this is after the debacle against the Broncos, playing Matt Ryan, and he had 58 attempts. And you also played him with Dion Jackson and Michael Pittman, a stud coming off a dud. He didn't have Patrick Surtain on in this game. And these three absolutely smashed. And you got a quarterback plus running back plus wide receiver. Not something you normally see, But when the quarterback is really cheap at 5,300 and the running back's really cheap at 5,200, that is something that is more likely to pay off. So really, you look at these top 4 players, this lineup could have easily won the Milly Maker if, Godwin had a better day, the kind of day that he was projected, and Andrews specifically, if he had a ceiling type game. It's just one of those things where you're trying to hit 9 legs of a parlay, 4 of them hit. Not all of them are always going to hit. That's just how it goes. But overall, very solid lineup. Eating chalk, but getting different. Playing Ramondre, playing Eno Benjamin, but getting different and really getting different and having those spots really hit. You just were let down by Godwin and Mark Andrews. Good day, but not the kind of ceiling performance you need from Mark Andrews. So exposures, Ramondre, we talked about. Minnesota D, heavy on that. Rondale Moore, a lot of people played Rondale Moore, myself included. He was in a smash spot. That game, obviously, they were hoping that this would go off, and if it did, we're talking about an incredible day for Giant Squid with DK Metcalf, Benjamin, Rondale Moore, that type of exposure. If that game really shot out, heavy on Mark Andrews, and then obviously with the Bucks, we looked at Godwin, heavy there. Kamara, pretty heavy exposure to Kamara, over 20%. Patrick Mahomes, he was low owned, so I totally see playing that. You have a high scoring game. You have Mahomes, you know what he's capable of. Playing the other side of that game that was low owned certainly made a lot of sense. Taking some shots there. And then, under the field on Allen and Diggs. Pretty low on MBS. Decent amount of exposure to Chase and Henderson. And getting exposure to that Bengals game. Not enough, though, to make it a profitable day. More in on the Bucks and Seattle game. Seattle and Arizona. But I think that will do it. Obviously, kind of the theme of the day, as we were talking about, was embracing the running back chalk. That's something we need to think about when going forward. And then be willing to eat some of that chalk and get different elsewhere, as we saw with a lot of the pros. Utica it seemed to work out for a positive ROI day. This is something to think about when we go forward, because we will continue to have hurt running backs where we get value plays, and it's okay to eat that chalk as long as you are able to get different elsewhere. It's lineup construction, and there's no such thing as good chalk or bad chalk. It is all about how you construct your lineup and get different to leverage the field, and you have to exploit that player pricing when you can. So thank you for joining us. That's going to do it for week 6. Of course, we'll be back for week 7. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Hit that notification button so you never miss an episode when we go live. Hope you all do great in the Milly Maker this next week, and we'll see you next week.